Hello, this video is about significant figures. I'll first write out the rules that can determine significant figures, and then later we will look at examples together. Number 1, all non-zero numbers are significant. Number 2, the zeros between non-zero numbers are significant. Number 3, leading zeros are not significant. We will see what leading zeros mean in a second. Number 4, trailing zeros to the right of the decimal point are significant. Again, we will learn what trailing zeros mean in a second. Number 5, trailing zeros in a whole number with the decimal shown are significant. Number 6, trailing zeros in a whole number without the decimal shown are not significant. Number 7, exact numbers have an infinite number of significant figures. Now let's take a look at examples of these cases. Number 1 was that all non-zero numbers are significant. Let's take a look at the numbers here, 5, 21, and 768. These are all non-zero numbers that does not include any zeros in their solution. In this case, the number of significant figures simply equal to the number of digits. For example, 5 would have a sig fig of 1, 21 would have a sig fig of 2, and 768 would have a sig fig of 3. Now let's move on to number 2, that zeros between non-zero numbers are significant. Now let's see what this means. The first number we have here is 101, where we see a 0 in this number, but this 0 is sandwiched between two non-zero numbers. For example, 1 on the left of 0 does not equal to 0, and then 1 that's at the right side of the 0 also does not equal to 1. So in this case, this 0 sandwiched between two non-zero numbers count as a significant digit. So number 101 would have 3 significant figures in total, because the 0 here also count as the significant digit. Same logic, the next number, 2071, would have 4 significant digits in total, because that 0 also count as a significant figure. And finally, the last number would have 7 significant figures in total. Moving on to number 3, that leading zeros are not significant. Let's see what this means. Let's take a look at the first example here, 0.51. On this case, the number is starting with a 0. On this case, when the number starts with a 0, that 0 is not significant. Therefore, when you have a decimal that starts with 0, we will not count that 0 as part of the significant digit. So 0.51 would only have 2 significant figures in total. Same logic, the number 0.502, it would not count the first 0 as significant because that's a leading 0, but it will count the second 0 as significant because that 0, not only that it's not a leading 0, but it's also sandwiched between two non-zero numbers, 5 and 2. So in this case, we would see 3 significant figures in total. Now number 4, this is that the trailing zeros to the right of the decimal point are significant. So this is right opposite of the leading zeros, where we don't count the zeros that happen to be at the beginning are not significant, but the trailing zeros that are to the rightmost side of the decimal point are in fact significant. So for example, if we have 1.0, because that 0 is the trailing 0 and it is after the decimal point, we count that 0 significant. So the number 1.0, we would have 2 significant figures in total. Let's take a look at the next example, 1.00. We consider both zeros, because those two are both trailing zeros, we consider them significant. So when we have 1.00, there will be 3 significant digits in total. The next example, 1.5050. On the first 0, that 0 is sandwiched between two non-zero numbers, so that's significant. Also, the second 0 we see, that's a trailing 0 after the decimal point, so you also want to call that significant. So here there'll be 5 significant digits in total. Then how about trailing zeros in whole numbers? Number 5 talks about trailing zeros in whole numbers, but with a decimal. Number 5 says, trailing zeros in a whole number with a decimal shown are significant. What this means is, well, let's take a look at the example. We have a whole number 560, but with a decimal at the end right next to that 0. Whenever there's a decimal at the very end of the whole number, we want to consider all zeros significant. So here, 560 with a decimal at the very end, we want to call that 0 significant, so that 560 would have 3 significant figures in total. Then how about 560.0? Well, the first 0 is part of the whole number, but it is right next to the decimal, so we want to call that significant. And also the second 0, that is a trailing 0 after the decimal point, so we also want to call it significant. So here, both zeros are significant, so there will be 4 significant digits in total. Number 6, however, talks about trailing zeros in whole numbers without the decimals. Number 6 talks about how trailing zeros in whole numbers without decimals are not significant. So for example, if we simply have a whole number 100 without any decimal points, these 2 zeros are trailing zeros which are not significant. So when we have a number 100, we only know that 1, the first number, is significant, so there only will be 1 significant figures in total. Then how about 10,150? Well, the first 0 is significant because it's sandwiched between 2 non-zero numbers. The second 0, however, is not significant because that is a trailing 0 in whole numbers but without decimals. So there will be 4 significant figures in total, although you see 5 digits. Finally, number 7, exact numbers have infinite sig figs. When the question gives you that these are exact numbers, we know that they have infinite sig figs because 1.0 would also equal to 1.00, which would also equal to 1.00000. And because we know that each trailing 0 are significant, exact numbers can have infinitely many significant figures. Finally, we can do an exercise. Here are the numbers. Why don't you take some time to count how many significant figures there are in each number? Well, the first number, 505, it has 3 significant figures because that 0 is sandwiched between 2 non-zero numbers, so that 0 is considered significant. So there are 3 sig figs in total. The second number, 1, well, it simply has 1 significant figure. 0.1 though, that 0 is a leading 0 before the decimal, so that doesn't count as a sig fig, so there will be only 1 sig fig in total. Same thing with 0.01, the 2 leading zeros, those are not significant, so there still is only 1 significant figure. 1.0 though, that 0 is a trailing 0, but that trailing 0 is after the decimal point, so that 0 should be considered as significant. So 1.0 has 1.0 has 2 sig figs in total. 100, those 2 zeros are trailing zeros, but those are part of the whole number, and because there are no decimal points at the very end, we know that these trailing zeros are not significant, so 100 would only have 1 significant figure. In contrast, that 100 with a decimal at the very end shows that these trailing zeros are significant, so that on this case there will be 3 significant figures in total.